Okay, great. So good morning, everybody. So as Nigel said, my name's Liz Alvey, and I'm a biology teacher from the University of Sheffield, and I teach mostly genetics, but I've got a little bit of a soft spot for brewing. I am not an expert in AI or large language models, so remember that as context when we go through my talk. And also, I think the other disclaimer right up at the beginning is that most of the things I'm going to talk about, I did before I knew what I was doing. So there's a slide a little bit later that's things I wish I'd done differently. And so I'm hoping by the end of the talk, you will feel encouraged to have a go and yes, and realize that nothing terrible happens if it doesn't quite go right the first time. Okay, so this first slide I've poached from the Khan Academy. So the Khan Academy has a lovely short course available to all called AI for Education. And this is a snip from their first article entitled AI for Learning. So it's kind of explaining how AI could be used in the broadest sense to support education. So the Khan Academy is an online learning platform that is quite well established as having an open access policy, education for all. And they have been quite aggressive about pursuing AI with a partnership with OpenAI to allow students to chat with the bots to help their learning. Unfortunately, we can't have a go in the UK at the moment, but we can have a look at their AI for Education course. So this is what the Khan Academy says about AI for learning. So that we know that learning outcomes are improved through 1, active engagement, 2, immediate feedback, 3, working at a personal learning edge, and 4, perceived value. Now that'll come up again later. And so there's some examples of how LLMs can promote learning. So leading students through steps of writing process while offering rubric-based feedback on drafts. Encourage students to check their understanding of procedural and application-based skills and tasks. Engaging with individual students on deeper learning questions like why, what if, and how. And helping students link what they're learning to their goals, their lives, and the things that they're really interested in. And so, although the Khan Academy is probably really aiming for a lower level of education than higher education, I hope we could all agree that they are reasonable aims for us to be aiming for at university. So thank you, the Khan Academy, for writing that slide. So what do the students think? So the first thing when you're talking to students that they are keen to tell you is that not everyone is using AI. So if you look at the news or whatever, you might think that everybody under the age of 25 is brilliant at this and is using it all the time. But a non-substantiated small poll of the students that I meet seems that just under half of people are using it, and most of the people that are using it are not feeling very confident. So I asked the students what they think the risks are of AI in education, and the biggest one is inequity of access. There's a real feeling that students who are using this and using it well have a real advantage over students who aren't. And then this one really surprised me. Students were worried that if you became over-reliant on AI or tools, that you would lose your creative skills and your critical thinking skills, which was a surprise. They spoke a lot about opportunities, particularly for language support, for students with a learning disability or students with English as a second language. They were hoping that this could help level the playing field. And students like to use it for summarising information and for looking for background information when starting a new topic. They also so what support do they need? So the most important thing that they're screaming for is guidelines. What is allowed? What is not allowed? Will I get accused of cheating? How will I know if the AI is making stuff up? This kind of thing. So they really like some rules. And then they'd also really like training and support. And they suggested this could be similar to the training that's currently offered through centralised services like the library. Okay. So that's what students think. So then I asked, what are you using AI for? So the number one is background information. Students said, as a search engine, because there's less to read. You gotta love them. Planning and getting started with an assessment or an assignment. Summarizing long documents. Again, yeah, getting started on things. And then these two things I was a little bit concerned about. So the first one was checking understanding. I'm not totally sure how AI could help you check you understood something, but maybe that's just me not having tried it. And also for feedback. So I don't know if that's feedback on their drafts, feedback on how they're performing on assignments, I'm not sure. So, and you probably need to know a little bit more about that. So that's a little bit of background. Now I'm going to give you 3 examples of where I brought ChatGPT into the classroom. I know there are many other large language models available, but for this semester, the only one that I was using was ChatGPT because it was available. So this was lesson 1, teaching the teachers. So the aim of this lesson is that AI is here, or ChatGPT is here, it is accessible, and it probably won't bite you. So the context for this was the departmental teaching away day. This took place in a medium quality conferencing centre in Sheffield. And we had 100 lecturers that were spread out over about 15-ish tables. And what I was told by my boss is this session will follow a session on learning support plans, which might be a little bit boring. So try to be fun, which is the worst. You should never tell someone try to be fun. Totally impossible. And so this is what I did. So I got everybody to play a game, chatbot or not bot. And so what I did is I took current students' research projects, which they just submitted. So we had about probably 350 projects submitted, and I took the abstracts from their project reports, and I asked ChatGPT to draft a lay summary based on the abstract. The students also need to write a lay summary. And so I mixed up student lay summaries with chatbot lay summaries. And I spread them over the tables, and the lecturers had to read them and decide if it was written by a chatbot or not bot, which is a student. So how did it go? Really well. So it was actually a bit fun. And I think the learning outcomes were met in that everybody in the room could not escape afterwards without knowing that ChatGPT was here. And I think it also highlighted what it could and couldn't do fairly well. So I would recommend doing that again. The only downside was it means that the entire department thinks I'm some kind of expert in AI. So needless to say, everybody's very disappointed when I can't answer all of their tricky AI questions. So I'd strongly recommend that to anybody. And the other thing was it was a sneaky way of reminding everyone that they had to do their project marking. So I was happy with that as well. Okay, so this is the second time, lesson 2. And this is where to show that ChatGPT is sometimes wrong. And so this is for students in a lecture scenario. So I'm stood at the front doing the talking, and they're sat there doing the listening. And so what I wanted them to learn from this was that your lecturer knows that LLMs exist, so don't pretend that you don't know. And then LLMs are often wrong, and that you should apply your research skills that we're developing in this course to fact check. So example 1 was a second year lecture on genetics. And so I already had in this lecture a slide that goes, Googling doesn't always work. And that's because, or first time, and that's because I was trying to teach students about non-invasive prenatal testing. And so I went to the Illumina website, which is a sequencing company, and I thought it would tell me how NIPT works. And it used the words sophisticated analysis. And I thought, ooh, I wonder if I can get away with that in my level 2 lecture. And I was like, no, come on, Liz, you can't. So then I went on to ChatGPT and said, how does NIPT work? Please focus on the stats. And it gave an accurate answer. And then I gave the students quite a lot of time in the session to read the answer that ChatGPT came up. But it didn't really have enough detail to really understand what was going on. So then what I did was I found a research article that was targeted at clinicians and highlighted the relevant information and gave the students a chance to read that, and then I think it was clearer what was actually happening and how NIPT works. So for the first example, it showed you that ChatGPT could be helpful, but it probably wasn't in sufficient detail. In the second example, this was much shorter. It's a smaller portion of the lecture, and this was in third year, and I was talking about artificial gametes. And I asked ChatGPT, just because I was interested, what happened to Dolly the cloned sheep's children? So I was like, I wonder what happened to them. I never bothered to look it up, thought it might be interesting. And ChatGPT said, Dolly had no children. I thought, sure she did. And so a little bit of Googling reveals that, yes, she did have children with a ram called David, and that the offspring of Dolly the cloned sheep were normal as far as anyone could tell. So that was a much shorter example, and it told the students that sometimes it's just wrong. So how would I rate that? So I'd rate that a 7 out of 10. Because I think that it definitely achieved the goal of telling students that I knew what LLMs were. And afterwards, I got quite a lot of questions saying, if you're allowed to use this, am I allowed to use this? And I think it was also quite funny, and it broke up the lecture. So I think that was quite nice. But the negative of that is it was very passive for the students. So they didn't actually use the tool at all. They just watched me use it. Okay, so that took place in early February. And so the next time that I did a session, I knew a little bit more about how it worked. So I'd investigated some of the sources, and I'd become a bit more confident about teaching with it. And so the lesson 3 was in a tutorial. So, and my conclusion from this is ChatGPT works best when you already know a little bit. And the reason for that is so that you can judge the quality of the output. So this was a group tutorial. I have 19 foundation students. So it was a tutorial with probably half of them. And the learning outcome was that the ChatGPT, or the large language model, can help you brainstorm, explore new topics, and structure your ideas. And the idea was that students worked in small groups of 2s or 3s to use ChatGPT to plan their literature reviews, which is an assignment that they do at the end of the year. So this, as I said, was a group tutorial on planning a foundation year lit review. So how did it go? So for this one, I'm only going to give it a 4 out of 10. And I think the problem was, it might be that foundation students are really not very confident in their own abilities, or that they lack the skills to think critically. So when the output suggested a structure for their essay, they just sort of thought, that's the one I'll do. I'll just do that. And they really didn't appear to have the confidence to be critical of the suggestion, and particularly because the tone of the output from ChatGPT is very confident. And I think a confident tone is, intimidating for foundation students. And so that tutorial did not go that well. I felt that it wasn't, it didn't go as I'd hoped. And I got a colleague to do a similar thing with first year students, although he did something slightly different. So he split the tutorial group into 2 teams, and he got one to plan without ChatGPT and one to plan with, and then swap over. And then they had to vote on whose plan was best, the student plan or the ChatGPT plan. And he concluded that when the students knew a bit about the topic, the student structure was better. But when they didn't know anything at all about the topic, then both were kind of equal quality. And I wasn't expecting that either. I thought ChatGPT would do a good job. But I realized that all the prompts that I give to it are topics I already know a fair bit about. And maybe that's why we're getting better outputs. So what I wanted to highlight here is that this experience contradicts what the students say that they are using it for. Because they're saying that they're using ChatGPT to get background information on new topics. And actually, in the tutorial setting that I did this, actually that wasn't very successful. The students did not really get the best out of it. And then the other thing I want to add, this is supposed to be a student looking horrified, sorry about that, is that one of the students in the foundation group looked incredibly uncomfortable through the whole session. And she was kind of fidgeting, and she was much quieter than usual. I was thinking there's something going on with her. And I spoke to her at the end of the session thinking that she might have some personal problem. And she just felt really uncomfortable, like she was going to get caught. And I'm like, I'm your tutor and I'm right here and I've told you to do it. So she really had in her head a fear of AI and that it was somehow wrong and, illegal and that she was going to get in trouble. And I think that's something I wasn't expecting at all. So if I was going to do this again, I'd address that at the beginning and say, you're allowed to use the bot that I have brought into this classroom with us. So I was really surprised about that one. Okay, so that is the 3 times. Okay, lesson 3B, act as an interviewer. Hang on a minute, you said there were 3 attempts. Why are you trying to sneak in a 4th? So the learning outcome of this session, this was a session sort of a classroom style, maybe 30 to 40 students. You can use AI to help you land any job. And this session was based on a YouTube video that I'd watched on prompt engineering. And by this point, I knew a little bit more about AI and I had plans for the policy and I had a structured session on it and I was feeling pretty confident and that I could really improve our students' chances of landing a job using some prompts. So the context was this was an optional session based on a YouTube clip. So 57 graduating students and 0 lecturers were invited to my session. Would anyone like to guess how many people came? 0 students and 2 lecturers. The lecturers weren't invited. How did they find out about the session? I have no idea. Anyway, seriously awkward. So how did it go? I'm going to rate it 0.2 out of 10 because I still consider these to be, virgin slides that have never been used. Although I did actually have a lovely time. Oh yeah, and I did do the session with the lecturers, although I'm not really encouraging our lecturers to go and land a job. So what was the conclusion for this disaster? The conclusion is you need to introduce the AI when it is useful right now. So if it's not useful to your students in the next 20 minutes, you might as well not bother. Yes, so feel a bit sad about that. I'd also been using ChatGPT generally for employability type things, sort of in my private life as well. So my son used it to convince an engineering company that playing a lot of online gaming will make him an excellent civil engineer. And yes, and another family member managed to become a trustee of a school using ChatGPT. So it really does do a good job of employability stuff. And conclusion 2 for that is lecturers would like a little bit of help with this, so much so they will come to sessions when they're not even invited. Okay, so what would I do differently? I forgot to warn students about using the bot safely. This is the thing I regret the most. So I didn't give any warnings at all about sensitive information and personal information. And so definitely next time, first thing I do is remind students not to put their credit card details and other personal information in. Although apparently ChatGPT now has an opt-out policy for data. So the second thing I do is introduce a clear AI policy at the beginning of the session that includes what is and what isn't allowed. The third thing, I design a learning activity that is immediately useful to students. So definitely don't try and plan an employability session. I'd add a session specifically on hallucinations, especially fictional citations. So this is something that our students are falling foul of. We are getting a few assignments submitted that are clearly written by ChatGPT with fictional citations. I would explicitly teach students how to structure a prompt. So instead of saying have a go and see what happens, I would give them some potential structure. So the rule, the results, the context and the goal and any constraints so that they can get higher quality outputs faster. I would ensure that there's an opportunity for students to actively learn the tool rather than watching me use it. I think if somebody was going to introduce this to their students for their first time, I think it is perfectly reasonable for you to show your outputs first. Actually, I think that worked very well. It was low stress for me because nothing could go wrong, and it was low stress for the students because I was driving, but it really doesn't have as much value as letting the students do it themselves. This is another important one that I didn't really see coming. So I would choose a topic that the students already have the required background knowledge to judge the accuracy and the quality of the output. So I actually don't have a suggestion of what that could be, but I think for a first go, you need to see what it's good at. Maybe you do one that was unrelated to science. So maybe get it to summarize your favorite TV show or something. So that it's a little bit of fun and the students have the required knowledge to be critical. And that's to avoid the problem that I had with the foundation year tutorial. Oh, I forgot to mention though, the foundation year tutorial did result on no student submitting a lit review that was entirely written by ChatGPT, and they are quite vulnerable to unfair means, foundation students, because they lack confidence and they often leave things to the last minute. So even though the tutorial wasn't that enjoyable at the time, and the quality of the outputs was a bit dodgy, I still think there was really value in that all of those students, if they are using ChatGPT, they're using it appropriately. And then the last thing, which I haven't done at all either, but I wish I had, was acknowledge the potential bias in the AI outputs. So I think the first thing that we need to go further is to look at a policy for using AI in the classroom. So this is a policy that I've taken directly from a guy called Ethan Mollick, which I got via the Khan Academy course. I won't read that now, but just know that it exists. I'm not sure that this is the perfect policy, but it's definitely the best I had at the time. So my ideas for next steps is to write, borrow, adapt an AI safety policy and incorporate that into the AI policy that I introduced at the beginning of the session. I've got an idea for an activity of 3 truths and a lie. So then I get the LLMs to generate some information on some relevant questions and find the ones where there's an inaccuracy and get the students to find it. I would actively teach students how to write great prompts. So we have a big project called Global Challenges, where students work in teams to suggest a solution to a global problem, the UN Sustainability Development Goals. I think we could teach students how to write some good prompts with that. I think it's really good at writing for different audiences. So I wonder if we should get our project students to do that so they can see how to change their writing for different purposes. I really want to acknowledge the bias in AI outputs, but I have no idea how to do this. So this is a call to the community. Suggestions welcome. And then the last thing is to encourage lecturers to use AI to complete their assignments or assessments and then reflect on what they find useful and then consider adjusting the assessments or the assessment criteria accordingly. And so that's a different challenge that I don't want to focus on, but I think is something out there. So after my 3 and 1 failed attempt to introduce ChatGPT, what are my top tips for educators? So the first one is to establish a transparent AI policy and openly share it with your students. And that's so that you can generate a collaborative environment so that everybody knows what's expected of them and can feel comfortable and also don't accidentally share their personal data. 2, you need to remember to cater to diverse learners. So recognize that some of your students may be unfamiliar with the language models. And so make your first assignment accessible to all. Expect initial exploration. So understand that initial prompts may not always help. So make sure that your session is robust enough to allow some pretty dodgy outputs the first time students have a go. Number 4, application of new skills. So introduce your LLMs at a stage where students can immediately apply their required skills. If you tell them how to do this so that they can use it later, well, nobody will bother to come and you will be lonely. Number 5, choose a suitable topic. So it has to be a topic that the students already know something about so that they can think critically about it. Number 6, emphasize fact-checking, so as many times as possible. In fact, maybe in most lectures, emphasize the need to fact-check all of the information. And then 7, I'm not sulking honestly, never, ever, ever attempt to support your students with employability. They don't want any help. Hey, that's it from me. These are my references. So this is where I got my information from. I'd like to say at the beginning of this, I didn't have really any information and I was just making it up as I went along. But I would really recommend that you look at other people's policies if you don't have an institutional one. And the UNESCO Quick Start Guide is really good as well. So I've only seen this recently, but I would definitely incorporate some of their ideas into my teaching. And that's everything from me. I'm going to stop sharing now.
That's great. Thanks, Liz. We've had some questions that come in while you've been talking. So the first one was from Jeffrey. So what was the success rate in detecting the AI? I think this is from the staff one that you did where you asked them to detect whether or not it was an AI one. What was the success rate for that?
Yeah, good. So, so I've got a bit of context here. So one, this was when I'd only been on ChatGPT for about 3 days. And it was, even at that point, was really tempting for me to improve it. So I had to really hold back from 1, improving the students' work, and 2, improving my work. So the detection rate was definitely above half. And people who are interested in this stuff anyway spotted it. So for all of the AI ones, it had the phrase, "It is important to note, comma," which a student has never used ever, right? So I'd say pretty mixed, but actually it was just a game. I mean, I didn't actually count the numbers. It was just fun. It was just a hands up and fun. So I think with a little bit of tweaking, both could have done better. Both the students and the AI could have done better. But just as it was more than half of the time the staff spotted it.
That actually kind of leads into Ian's question, actually. He said, we're seeing a rise in staff thinking they can detect a robotic influence in student submission. So what did staff think they saw in work that identified as AI authored? So obviously the important comma bit. Is there anything else that they highlighted?
Yeah, so I didn't specifically ask that. So one person said, so there was a very similar structure to the AI one. So they could see them all at once. So they had a sentence and a half on, 2 sentences on this, 2 sentences on this, and 2 sentences on that. So in isolation, not so much. But with another one, they felt that they basically followed the same pattern. I mean, also they were grammatically perfect. And then the big giveaway was no italics. So we try to teach our students to use italics for Latin, for example, bacterial species names. And generally our students can do this. So it kind of stood out that half of them, well, not everyone had a microbe, but those that had a microbe or a gene name had the correct nomenclature if a student wrote it, but the incorrect nomenclature if a bot wrote it. But I didn't actually ask staff that. I mean, that's my feelings. And then somebody who knew a lot about it could spot the little phrases like "it's important to note" and similar things.
That's actually quite interesting because there was a big study done in the States with high school teachers marking essays, and there was something like about a 2% success rate over something like 50,000 pieces of work that were actually correctly identified as ChatGPT generated. So it's quite interesting. There's quite a discrepancy there.
Well, so there's several differences. So one, I would hope every member of staff has read quite a few student lay summaries and student abstracts before, and so would have some experience. Also, it's very short. Like, I don't know how well they'd spot it over, 200 words or 220 words for a lay summary. We have really short ones. So I think also they knew half of them were going to be AI generated. It wasn't a blind test, it was a game. So I don't think we can extrapolate how they would do. I'm really tempted, although I don't dare because it would really upset people, is to start submitting assignments to other bits of the university. Like I'd have a go at Italian literature, or I'd have a go at architecture, and just knowing absolutely nothing and just seeing how I do. But then can you imagine learning that 6 of the essays you just marked were sent by some random academic from another department? Would be quite upset.
I think David has already done this. He's nodding away there.
So he's not afraid of the wrath of somebody who's marked something extra marking for 3. But I would really like to do that.
I didn't tell them. I didn't tell them afterwards either.
Oh.
Well, I did later on.
We were like with a large piece of cake.
Alison has asked, this was done with ChatGPT 3 or the new version, which is better. So I'm assuming that's from 3 to 3.5 rather than the paid version of 4. But
so most of this was done with, all of this was done with ChatGPT 3.5 or 3, the one that, is it 3.5? But I've just tried using Bard, for my son's GCSE chemistry, and it does the maths quite nicely. It does little coding snippets. So actually, I haven't had enough of a go with Bard yet, but I think one of the problems with us is quite a lot of our questions involve data and some kind of data analysis, and so I'd have a go. So this was all done with the free version of ChatGPT that I could use.
There's a couple of comments have come in about sort of actually there are now library guidelines on how to cite AIs, which Jeffrey is linked to, on sort of an APA style of how to cite it. You've opened a total can of worms with no students turning up because you didn't offer free lunch, but now there's a debate in the chat as to whether or not free lunch and money actually works with getting students to come in. So that's open.
Yeah, it was one of those where it was properly timetabled, but I was honest with the students about what was going to be happening in the session. They knew it was optional, but it was just to help them. I was like, I just think this will help you and it won't take you very long. Anyway, brilliant. Well done, me.
Going through just to see if there's any other. I think that is the end of the questions that we've had. So, Jeffrey, consequences for assessment. We can get the students in the habit of citing the help they get, but can we also require more tasks requiring judgment, prediction, decisions? I found that OpenAI was quite limited on this kind of task. You got any thoughts about maybe that line in terms of?
I have lots of ideas for assessments that you could use it for, most of them being quite work-based. So I'm imagining I'm doing a job, for example, my job. And so I could use it effectively to help me. So I'm imagining like a team-based thing. And I wouldn't ask students to say what they'd used it for. I'd just say, oh, you've got some ideas. My ideas, teamwork, and then they get between 9 and 5, like a day's activity, and then they can choose the form of their output. So video, blog, article, poster, whatever they want, and they just get judged on the quality of their ideas and the clarity of their communication. And I don't care how they get there. A bit like if that was their job. So that's kind of where I'm imagining it can be used well. But then, because of course, a big chunk of the day would be fact checking. Right? Because you could whip up a quick business plan or whatever it was in, 14 seconds using ChatGPT. Then you spend the rest of the day checking that it hadn't just totally made some stuff up, or that there wasn't already a patent on it or whatever. So I think there is a lot of I think there's a lot of potential. What I'm really hoping for is to find out what employers are using it for. But there's been no sort of formal organisation for that, and then I'd structure my assessments around that.
I think that's a really good idea in terms of like how are employers expecting our graduates to be able to use it, because ultimately that's what we need to be producing graduates to do, to go into the workplace. Brilliant. Liz, thank you very much. That was a really nice talk.